Welcome to Team Futurism. Today I'm interviewing Erich J, who is the editor of Merion West. His writing has also appeared in The Hill, Follett, and many other publications. Erich, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate the introduction. We've enjoyed a lot of your articles at Merion West over the years, as well as some of your interviews with Zoltan Istvan and I think some other people. So it's always exciting for us to see another one of your submissions in our inbox.
Yeah, absolutely. So Merion West is one of my favorite publications. Aside from the fact that you have to publish me like 20 plus times, I was surprised to see how many essays I had up there. But also you guys somehow managed to publish really provocative essays on politics and culture without becoming hyperpartisan or sensational, which is quite rare. Give me a little bit of backstory of the history of Merion West and what you guys are up to there.
It's 2026. We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. So we're very pleased to have reached that decade mark. It'll be technically in August because we formulated Merion West in Marion Station, Pennsylvania, sort of part of where the name came from in August of 2016. And I really appreciate the compliment because that is what we try to do is it almost sounds impossible. We try to talk about provocative, controversial issues in a way that's not caustic or hyperpartisan, and that people are willing to listen to articles that present an idea they might, if it was presented differently, strongly bristle at, not read past the first or second sentence, but present it in a way that whether they agree or disagree, they're willing to hear out someone who potentially has a very different worldview than their own. We just published an article the other day by Robert Jensen. He's a very neat guy. I like him a lot, and I enjoy reading his articles, and I think a lot of readers enjoy his articles. I think if they sat down with Professor Jensen, a lot of our readers, they probably wouldn't agree on a shared worldview or even on many issues, but Bob just presents his articles in such a way that even people who I think have dramatically different worldview than him can at least take something away from his article or understand how someone thinks who sees things so differently. And that's kind of, Merion West emerged in an era, of course, what people like Jonathan Turley have called the post-persuasive age. And we try to, as much as possible, invite honest discussion. And as you alluded to, that's not synonymous with being milquetoast or not saying or trying to just find the exact medium between the left and right position and say that's what I stand for. There's a certain radio host in Philadelphia who sort of made his whole career of whatever the Republicans or Democrats say, he just says, let's meet in the middle. And if the Republicans said we're going to do something extremely terrible and extreme, and the Democrats said we're going to do something extremely terrible and extreme on the other side, he would say, let's take the best and worst of both and just live with it or whatever. And that's what we don't do. We don't just say, okay, we're going to meet in the middle or split the difference. We try to have people make interesting arguments and talk about things. And I'll turn it back to you, and maybe we'll talk more about this. But one of the things we're trying to do at the new Merion West and our new iteration is talk about more things that really affect a lot of people's lives that aren't necessarily being covered as much as they could be or should be in the news media.
Yeah, so you guys did just kind of, I wouldn't call it rebrand, but you relaunched with a subscription model, which I think is interesting. We can definitely talk about a little bit. But one thing that I noticed in the difference between the old Merion West and was newly released or launched was previously you guys did really heavily emphasize, I think explicitly, that you wanted to publish voices from the left, the right, and the center. And I noticed that language is partly taken away. I'm kind of curious if you think that that's just because like the times have changed a little bit, and like there was a moment when it was like a thing to be like, we're publishing both voices. We're here the far left and the far right. You know what I mean? And like that's how we're going to frame the discussion. And now, I mean, this is part of my curiosity is there's so much talk about how like the far left and the far right have like, horseshoe theory. It's
Sure.
almost like the same thing. And like those ideas might even be meaningless at this exact moment in time, as the far right and the far left both sort each other out or sort themselves out, right? Was there anything like a thought about why you might have dropped that, explicit framing, or is it just like a natural evolution?
Well, that's such a great question, Peter, and I appreciate how observant you are. And the dropping of the left-right center dynamic actually predated the relaunch by about 18 months. So we were never 100% comfortable with the left-right center labeling. We, for I guess 8 years or so, thought that the benefits of the labeling slightly outweighed the drawbacks. And then kind of how life works, sometimes you're already thinking of doing something, and then the right moment comes along, and as we say in philosophy, things are overdetermined. So in January of 2024, I believe it was, we were already in our regular editors meetings discussing that we didn't like the benefit. So the argument for it is it was similar to Bob Jensen's piece the other day where he talked about, I think instead of professors saying, I don't want my students to know how I vote, which is actually kind of how I agree with, but Bob challenges all of us to think. And he says, instead of doing that, I'm just going to tell the students how I vote. I'm not going to try to convince them otherwise. And I'm going to be upfront about my biases or how I see the world. And I'm just going to be upfront about that. And that's what we did it for a long time at Merion West. We just said, we're going to be upfront with where the view's coming from on the spectrum. Now, of course, the biggest challenge is some people disagree on what's left. Some people disagree on what's right. Some people say, it's a common like Democratic talking point. The Democratic Party would actually be center right in Europe. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's like a common talking point. So that was the first problem. And the second problem, which I really didn't like, is it boxed people in of like, you're a left thinker, you're a right thinker, you're a center thinker. And I really didn't like that. I didn't like it for a long time, but it was something we played with in the beginning, and then people kind of knew Merion West for it. It was kind of hard to phase out. And when we eventually did phase it out, a lot of people were upset about it, including some of our writers. They said that they're very upset about it. But in January of 2024, we got a great essay submission, and it basically argued that a lot of this left, right, center labeling is A, super arbitrary, and B, products of certain historical periods and things like that. And it just kind of pushed us over the edge. And also at the time, we had brought in a new arts editor. He is actually, he ended up, he's not with us now. We have a new arts editor, but this fella, Johnny Payne, he really kind of helped get our art section moving and our poetry moving. And he was with us for about 14 months or so. And he also kind of chimed in his first meeting, and we were having the debate, and he was very decidedly like, let's get rid of this. And it was sort of just a perfect storm. And I don't want to say they're causally related, but we did start with Johnny joining us and getting the art section up and moving, getting rid of the left, right, and center. I think it started to spark a flame in our publisher Henry Matilla's mind that we should continue to evolve, continue to improve. And in the months about 10 months later, he said, let's relaunch the site. He's an aesthetics guy, and I give him so much credit to so much of the stuff that happens at Merion West, especially behind the scenes, in terms of the structure of where the content lives. We don't like the word content, but where the essays and interviews and poems live. That's kind of my domain, but Henry provides the framework or the sandbox in which all of that happens. And in October of 24, he said, it's a new decade and time for a new look. And then we also reconsidered how we did a number of things, and we're always trying to improve and tinker and such, while not to sound trite, but while keeping true to what we believe in and our mission and how we have mostly done things in the past prior to the relaunch during those first 9 years or so.
I have one last question about the relaunch.
Yep.
I'm curious about this as just a broader topic. So you guys are now on a subscription model, and it's very affordable. I recommend people go up.
Thank you so much, Peter. We
But
try to keep it affordable. We're not trying to buy catamarans or something with the modest revenues.
in my mind, like I'm fascinated by this topic of this is where the internet is going, right, to more subscription model basis. But like it's hard, like as a consumer, not to always frame things in terms of, okay, how much is like Netflix, and then like all the content you get from Netflix versus like, okay, so like the Fifth Column podcast is $10 a month. You like it's like, okay, this much entertainment versus, but then like you have to do the calculation. Maybe I'm not paying for the entertainment. I'm paying to like be part of this community. There's like calculations that go on in people's minds. I think that, like,
completely. And that helps
yeah,
inform our prices, because we're not the Wall Street Journal. We're not the New York Times. We provide a very small percentage of relative articles and information to them. So it would be, in our view, absurd to ask people to pay more to read at most an article, a new essay or piece of poem or article a day, than to get an entire Wall Street Journal delivered to them or something like that. But the subscription versus advertising question is a very important and good one, and it has ramifications well beyond our little corner of the internet.
Do you think that advertising is done? Is it a past model?
So, as some people may know, for nearly 5 years, in addition to running Merion West, I had a job as a media columnist. I wrote something called News on the Record. It came out every Monday, and I talked about various trends in the media business, the business side of things mostly. And I would talk about other things to do with editorial strategies and things like that. But I mostly talked about the business of media, because it was the audience were people who worked in media industry. And I never thought that a move to a subscription model was a normatively good thing for journalism. I didn't think it was a good thing at all. And on September 6th, 2019, I wrote an article for the News on the Record column. It was after we used to not publish it for 2 weeks in the end of August, because I guess there was a business decision on their part, I suppose. Their readership dipped. People were at the beach or hiking or whatever people do in late August. So I was actually writing about a controversy that happened about a month prior, when, if you recall, there was this unfortunate spate of shootings in El Paso, Texas, and in Dayton. And the New York Times initially ran a headline about it. I actually had it written down because I wanted to share it if this came up. Yeah. So the New York Times ran a headline that said, Trump urges unity versus racism. He gave a speech after the shooting, and I may have actually watched the speech at the time, because I was also like, I was doing more political journalism at the time. I kept more on top of the news than I do now that we've kind of shifted what we do a little bit at Merion West. And so I don't know. I thought that was kind of an anodyne headline, but this prompted, if you may recall, the hashtag cancel NYT hashtag on Twitter. And the New York Times reported that they had a very sizable amount of cancellations of subscriptions that day. And something similar happened at the Washington Post, I guess, when they declined to endorse in 2024. Yeah. And I wrote at the time, and I wasn't the only person who was saying it. There was, I think, Jill Abrams and other people. She gave a talk, I think, at maybe South by Southwest, and she was saying that this is a concern. When you move to a subscription model, you are more beholden to the political preferences of your subscribers and readers than in an advertising model, typically. Now, it's possible, or maybe even probable, that if a newspaper runs a lot of articles critical of a certain industry that advertises with them, that the industry maybe gets upset. But generally, it's just taken over a longer period of time. It's not as an emotionally reactive decision.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that a move to a subscription model was a good thing, probably, for journalism. So I prefer an advertising model, but as we know, we don't live in a world where our preferences are always directly reflected in policy or how the world actually is. So it's undeniable that the subscription model has seems to be pretty dominant in the internet. I'm not, I didn't go to grad school for media history. There are people who could probably answer this question better than I could. For a long time, my father used to deliver the Trenton Times as a child, and people obviously paid as subscribers to the Trenton Times. So but they also, of course, had prominent advertising. So I'm not an expert on whether or not various newspapers in mid-century or such were as influenced by that. But and as we know, way back when in the 19th century, newspapers were actually way more partisan than they probably are now, and they existed for certain political parties. And then a lot of historians of media have argued that broad-based advertising is what created the sort of idea most of us have of what a newspaper should be, relatively impartial, because the advertisers want to appeal to a wide variety of people. Everybody buys soap, so let's try to not alienate 40% of the population by attacking John F. Kennedy all day because maybe they want to buy soap. So I guess there's a long way of saying, is advertising dead? One of my other articles was Media's Endless Vice and Predicting the Future. I guess nobody really knows, but I think broad-based advertising has represented differing shares of how media companies get their revenue over time. And it's possible that the subscription model will ebb or flow. I don't really know, but
my hot take on this is I
Yeah.
think that there's so much free content. There's so much free content, whether there's advertising or not. You can, like, if you have a library card in most cities in the United States, you can get Canopy, which is a movie streaming platform, and it's got everything there, right? There's so many different ways to stream
I have
free
Canopy.
movies with zero. Yeah, I watch it all the time. It's great. And it's totally free. No ads. You can do that for like every medium. You can find free stuff all over the place. I think even if we don't admit it necessarily, or maybe even we do, I think that we really are, when we pay a subscription, and this is why I think it's going to just move forward into the future more than maybe advertising, just as in like an emotional thing that we do as consumers. I think that you are paying to be associated with that brand. So even if it's Netflix, you're paying to talk to your friends about how you have a Netflix account. There's like a brand there, or you pay for, the Fifth Column or whatever podcast because you want that brand. You want to be associated with that brand and like have that, that relationship with those guys or whoever it is. I think and that's like, because no one needs to pay for anything and no one needs to see any ads even anymore. There is so much free stuff. There's so much free stuff with zero ads on it. We really are paying for like something else aside from entertainment at some level, I feel like. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I will say quickly that I actually read the New York Times when I read it through my library as well. So
There you go.
they give you a passcode as a member of the library.
Right.
And so whenever I read the New York Times, I read it through my library. And so that was another one of my columns. It was about how a subscriber model related to a comment section that only subscribers can participate in, and it's more about being part of a community. I think it was in the early days of maybe Quillette Circle, where you had to be a subscriber in order to participate in Quillette Circle. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm not sure you had to pay to do that. Maybe you just had to give them your email address. But at Merion West, for instance, in our new subscriber model, you do have to be a subscriber in order to participate in the comment section.
That's very common. Like the free press is the same thing because that's where your community is. You're paying to be part of that community, sort of thing. Which is.
But then the crazy thing at Merion West, because we're more focused on doing this because we love it rather than maximizing the bottom line. If anyone wants to read Merion West, and even though it's only $3 a month, if for some reason people don't want to pay or can't afford it, they can send us an email and we will give them an access code and they can read Merion West for free.
I like that too. Yeah.
We do that. It's voluntary. It's like the art museum where they say, on Fridays, pay what you wish or something like that. Like, it would be nice if people gave us a couple dollars. It's not very expensive. And it's really just to kind of keep the lights on and pay for the things we do. It's not going to us. But if for some reason people are unable or unwilling, or sometimes an older person, there's an older fella in Austria, he said, I don't have, I would love to pay you. I don't know how to use credit card or Venmo. If I lived in America, I would mail you a check. It's too confusing. I said, yeah, you could just read on the house.
Do you have any strong opinions about all the AI platforms that are gobbling up content, not paying for it, and using it to generate content? A lot of people say that that's theft. A lot of people say, I'm more on this side, that like copyright is gonna die anyway, so let's just give up on it. Do you have any strong thoughts there?
Do you mean in terms of aggregators and things like that?
Like ChatGPT, they've read every book, right? And so you can say like, write me an essay in the style of Kara Swisher, and it knows how to do that because it's read all of her books and all of her columns. And so Kara Swisher would say, and has said, that is stealing her IP and regurgitate. But then like, that's what the brain does. The human brain consumes content and then like regurgitates it with reference to things that the brain has consumed. Yeah, curious if you have any strong thoughts on that.
I might have to think more about that question. We might have to put a pin in that. I might have to reflect on that. I admittedly have not spent a lot of time previously kind of considering that question, but it is an interesting one. And your comment about, is copyright going to become passé? That's an interesting thought. I'd have to think more about it. Maybe it'll be an article 7 years from now.
Yeah. Written by ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly.
So
but to your point about AI, one of the things we try to do at Merion West, and we've talked about that a lot, and we talk about the whole AI thing happening, and one of the things we're trying to, how we kind of have been grappling with that, is we think to ourselves, in a world full of AI, Henry Mattill uses the term slop, but whatever you want to call it, AI. In Merion West, we try to, especially nowadays, all our articles, I think, maintain a very high level of craftsmanship. And we say, this is a place you can come where you're going to see human beings, kind of like when Gabriel Garcia Marquez gives this amazing interview at the Paris Review, and he says, writing is like carpentry, and you work on it, you move this around, you come back, you sand, you saw, you do this and that. And that's sort of what our articles are like at Merion West. So unlike in the old days, most of our articles, they go through a number of drafts. I'm not saying some articles or many articles in the old days didn't go through drafts. Many of them did, maybe even most. But there's, I think, an increased emphasis on, we're going to publish a little less often, but everything is going to be really good and really interesting. And if we're going to ask people to give us a subscription, a few dollars a month, or just as you said, in the amount of stuff, content, articles to read, if you're going to entrust us with your attention, like the so-called attention economy, if you're going to give us your attention, we're not going to waste your time. And that factors into decisions we make in terms of what we publish. And we think to ourselves, this is a very good article, maybe even a really good article, or this is a decently written article, and maybe not spectacularly written, about an important topic, but there's so much other stuff out there. Can we in good faith say to our readers that in all the amazing ways you could entertain yourself in the 2020s, you could do the old stuff, you could go canoeing, you could play tennis, but even if you're on your computer, all the ways you can entertain yourself, I use Duolingo. I love Duolingo. Like, if I were going to ask for your 7 minutes, is this going to be one of the best ways you could spend 7 minutes? And whenever the answer is no, we have to make the hard decision to say, we're not going to publish this article, even if we like it, even if we think it's really good or important. But if it's not one of the best ways a reader could spend 7 minutes, then the answer, unfortunately, is now no.
So I get accused sometimes of being a quote idea guy. People have called me this as like a slur, although I take it as a compliment, because I will like totally humor ideas that understandably are beyond the pale sometimes. And I get the feeling that
Yeah.
Merion West does too. You guys don't really seem to be terribly afraid of, but, for example, interviewing Charles Murray, that some people just like that name gives him like an ick factor. And so they won't necessarily touch him, that sort of thing. What's your thoughts on like platforming? Is there anyone you wouldn't publish? Like if Curtis Yarvin came to you guys and was like, hey, I've got this like outlandish article about like, Donald Trump should be king. Would you guys, do you have a line, I guess?
Well, it's a great question, and it has come up at many points, starting a few weeks into Merion West. A few weeks into it, we figured, well, we have to get the ball rolling. If a couple of nobodies, we were still in college, if a couple of nobodies are writing articles about sort of vanilla opinions, nobody's going to read that. How are we ever going to get the ball rolling? So we had a couple other people who were helping us at the time, and it's kind of, I guess it's like any entity or business or whatever, that like it's almost like the ship of thieves, like Thebes. So many people are come in and out over the years. It's hard. It's an interesting, like anybody's story, and even in your life, I guess, that you were friends with someone in kindergarten and now you lost touch with them, or friends with someone in high school. Where are they now? So, but we had some people who were very helpful in the starting of Merion West, and for whatever reasons, they've moved on to other things, or we've moved on, or whatever. So they reached out to some people, and there were a couple of individuals who were very interested in writing with us. But it became pretty clear to me that it probably wouldn't be in the best interest of the publication to do this. We don't want to be, we are not nutty people, but we also wanted Merion West to be pretty pluralistic. And one of the biggest differences between Merion West and some of the other of our quote unquote peer publications, and I won't single them out because I like many of them. I like the people who run them. But the biggest difference, I would say consistently, is I always made sure that it never became the Eric Prince show. I never wanted people, Merion West's articles and editorial stance, to be what my views are. And a lot of our writers to this day don't know what my views are. And that's kind of how I'd probably like to keep it, because I never want people to feel uncomfortable that they're not welcome here or whatever. We want to evaluate the article based on the strength of the argument and the quality of writing and things like that. Now, we have often pushed the envelope. We have sometimes, and we've paid a high price for doing that. We have run afoul of Google, which was extremely costly for our growth, extremely. And we ran afoul of Google during the early days of the pandemic for publishing a variety of viewpoints on the pandemic. But this is a crucial point that a lot of people maybe missed, is we didn't just publish any Yahoo's thoughts on the pandemic. So we determined that you had to have an MD or PhD and have some expertise on epidemiology or medicine. So it's not some guy on his couch. But we did publish an article by a doctor in California that questioned the lockdown strategy, and he probably turned out to be right, but we were like everyone else. We were just going through a very difficult situation. I used to say to people, I'm so glad I'm not the mayor of Philadelphia or whatever, because it's a very hard decision of what to do. Hasn't happened in decades, maybe a century, and you're tasked with wanting to do this. So we just tried to grapple, like everyone else, with what to do. And we published views by experts, doctors, scientists on this. But as you probably recall, Google and some of the big tech companies took a very hard line against various positions on that. So we ran afoul of them. But we don't have we make decisions sort of these days more as a committee on every article. It's almost like a appeals court. There's three of us, and so it's like usually 2-1 whether or not we move forward on an article. And we all have equal vote. And of the various, we have a few people who work at Merion West, but they on a given article there'll usually be three of us, and we'll maybe get in a fourth person sometimes. But in terms of like truly off the wall stuff, they do come in from time to time, but I don't think we've ever, and that goes back to what you were saying before, like what defines left and right. I guess Some people might say that Charles Murray is completely like out of the Overton window. We don't feel that way, but maybe some people do. And occasionally people will cancel a subscription, and for reasons like along those lines, that because when you cancel a subscription, it has a like a box. I think it's maybe mandatory to fill out, or maybe not. I don't know. I think it is. You could just write NA, but I think you say why, and sometimes they'll say something along those lines. But we do want Merion West to be fairly pluralistic and fairly representative of the major viewpoints that are out there. And I remember one time we were supposed to interview someone. I won't say his name, but he was he's one of the columnists at the Wall Street Journal, and he was supposed to come in for an interview. And maybe a few days before the interview, he was absolutely outraged that we had published an essay by Henry George. He's a British writer. Maybe you've seen some of his pieces at Merion West or in other magazines and such, in which he favorably reviewed a book by Yoram Hazony. And this particular writer considered that beyond the pale, and he sent a very not warm and fuzzy email saying, I would never dignify with my presence a publication that would air Yoram Hazony's views. So that rubbed me the wrong way, because this individual is very like, I'm a small L liberal, I'm that sort of thing. So it just rubbed me the wrong way. So I consulted with Henry Matilla, and I wrote him I think a pretty long response, maybe 6-7 paragraphs explaining all our reasoning on this. And he wrote back and he said, you know what? Yeah, you're right. We'll still do the interview. And I said, oh, okay, great. How, sent him 3 times and never heard back from him. But with that said, 99% of the time, people appreciate what we're doing, because I think we don't do it. We don't publish people who are throwing bombs, or we have no profanity policy. We have a no name calling policy. When someone's like obviously hates one of the presidents of either parties, and like when, let's say, he doesn't like President Trump but likes President Biden, and in there it says President Biden and then Trump, that we go in, of course, add President Trump, so we try to do it in a way that even if someone is articulating a viewpoint that a lot of people might disagree with, it's done in a way that's respectful or whatever. But the last thing I'll say is that at the new Merion West, I think, unlike at the old one, there's a little more focus on curation of articles that are more representative of maybe my and Henry Matilla, our publisher's worldview, than in the past, where it was just kind of purely a panoply of opinions of the marketplace of ideas. And I think as Twitter and other places became more of that kind of free-for-all, we said, I think maybe a little bit. We still publish a variety of viewpoints, don't get me wrong. This is just moving the spectrum a little bit, but we're going to start to reflect in our coverage priorities that Henry Matilla and I, and to a lesser extent, our senior editors and such, share. So there are certain things that he and I are very, feel very strongly about, and are very involved with.
Can you share a few of those?
Yeah, so this is what I wanted to sort of, as I said earlier, we want to talk a lot about issues that maybe fly below the radar that have really big effects on people's lives. So I'll give you an example. One of the most dangerous things any of us can do throughout our lives is drive a car. So in the course of any of our lives, we have about a 1 in 95 to a 1 in 104 chance of dying in a car accident. So in August, I put forward this article on reckless driving, and I gave a number of examples from my life, because driving in Philadelphia is something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. It is one of the circles of hell, truly. And any one of us can just rattle off various instances we've had. So that's an example of something that, and this is another really important point. I used to talk about this a lot in my column when I was media critic, was that it's not like it's not like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, they don't cover these things. They're fairly
Mhm.
thick newspapers. If you ever pick up the New York Times and sometimes read it in the sauna, it's pretty sizable. But back to there'll be all this like Twitter armchair people who be like, the media doesn't talk about so and so happening, and like I just got back from Tanzania. They'll say nobody talks about this, what's been going on in Tanzania, which is really a terrible situation of uh, uh,
Oh boy,
election.
I don't even know about it. I don't even
Yeah,
know about it.
well,
I'm gonna blame the media.
I wouldn't probably know about it either if I hadn't just been there. And everyone who's there is like, please, Mr. American, listen to this situation. It's a very bad situation. So they have this sort of
I will have to
one,
look it up.
yeah, they have
You're
this one
spreading the
party
word.
state, and
Okay.
this woman, she has an election, and she disqualifies her opponents from the ballot. She disappears them. Then when people
Typical.
when people protest the election, there's um, it's hard to get good reporting because she shuts off the internet, closed down the international
Mhm.
airports. Friends. I met a lot of people there. They'll ask for my WhatsApp. They keep in touch. They say, they've been firing on us, like a really bad situation. But someone might say, the media never talks about that. Well, they do. If you go deep enough in the New York Times, there'll probably be a 400-word article on like disputed election in Tanzania results in protests and dozens presumed dead, but the government won't give official accounting. But my point is, back to this attention question. We only have so many hours in the day. We've got many of us work. We have families. We got to deal with figuring out why our doctor's office is giving us the wrong bill. Like there's only so many. We've got to. I don't know about California. In Pennsylvania, you always have to get your car inspected. Like there's only so many hours in the day, and it's a question of what we bring into focus. So one of the things we're trying to do at Merion West is bring into focus issues that I'm not saying they're not covered, because they are. Everybody knows, like, all you have to do is turn on Channel 6 here in Philadelphia and say, another car wreck or whatever. But we want to kind of put into context or help people understand things that are really affecting people's lives. So another thing we're really interested in, Henry Matilla and I are really interested in this, and this is something you're probably interested in, the state of medical research. We're cancer, heart disease, um, these things affect so many people. So these are things we feel really strongly about. Henry Matilla has been working for a very long time on a very long article that's hopefully going to come out soon on generic drugs. And he's going to try to parse out how good or not good they are as an alternative to the brand names. He's been working on this for a very long time. And so I think in the old days, we were, to your point about ideas, I think we were extremely ideas focused, and not in the way you're saying. When you talk about ideas, like your ideas have some practical applications for sure. Whether how long we're going to live, whether or not we're going to have a too few or too many houses. But I think in the old days, we had a lot of articles that were too academic, and
Mm.
they were really, there was a small number of people who were interested in this. And because I'm in charge of Merion West, when I go places, and it's good and bad. Like I'm happy people are reading it, and then they'll tell me what they think of what we've been doing lately. And so I'm sort of like, in addition to being the editor in chief, I'm sort of the ombudsman. And I remember I went to a Christmas party maybe 2 years ago, and there's a fellow there and he said, anytime I can't sleep at night, I pick up some of your Merion West philosophy articles, and 3 sentences in, I'm out cold. And we just get a lot of feedback like that. And it's, again, kind of like the advertising. There's the way maybe we want the world to be, or we want readers focused to be, and then there's the way it is. So a
Yeah.
lot of our people who are editors and contributors at Merion West are super interested in philosophy. I started out as a philosophy major. People are really interested in philosophy, but it turns out not that many people are, and those who are maybe should just go read a philosophy journal.
Mhm.
And
Good point. Yeah.
yeah, they like this. We started out that way, so we still keep a fairly cerebral or ideas driven approach to things, but we generally like to try to increasingly tie the ideas a little bit to the world. So I'll give you an example, because it's the most recent article we published of Robert Jensen's article. He was bringing up, it's not deep in the philosophy stacks at the Sterling Library or something. It was a fairly relatable question, which was, um, how should a professor deal with the fact that he has political views and maybe he's teaching in a law class or like an undergraduate law class, like, bioethics and law or whatever, or he's teaching about a sociology class. How do you deal with the fact that he has really strong views and they're going to get reflected? And then he makes the argument that if you don't talk about a certain political issue, that's sort of a political choice as well. But instead of just doing that in a vacuum, and it was maybe, I don't want to say fortuitous, but it was it all kind of came together like a lot of things. He was talking about when he was teaching in University of Texas in 2003, around the time of the Iraq War. And then I said to him, and he also thought it, he said, well, let's make this a little more timely. Let's talk about how you would assess if you were a professor in an international law class talking about the recent Maduro situation in Venezuela. And then we have this phrase, we like to make the timely timeless and the timeless timely. And that's what we try to do at Merion West. So
I like that.
It's kind of like the fellow Rob Henderson. He wrote the book Troubled, and he's pretty active on Twitter. And he always says, I like to read an article that's at least 5 years old that's being shared around because it means it's sort of stood the test of time. And that's sort of one of the things we'd like to do at Merion West, that somebody can go pick up an article about X, Y, or Z that happened several years ago and still see it engaging with themes that are long-standing. I'm not saying there's nothing new under the sun, but that there's precedent for certain things and future applications.
Well, let me ask you a question totally pertinent to this topic. So recently you did an interview with Charles Murray.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in the recent letter from the editor that's currently posted on the homepage of Merion West, you wrote, and this is a quote, once an ascendant force, the new atheist movement is perhaps breathing its last. It is our humble opinion that we are all the better for it. In context, the Charles Murray interview was about his new book that's pro-Christianity, right? So you guys are kind of like a little bit siding with him there, which I found fascinating. And I've written about this a bunch, I think even for Merion West, kind of like struggling with the idea that or the question, is society harmed by the retreat of Christianity? And just for practical reasons, should we kind of bring back some of the Christian values, let's say, that we have, quote, lost? Do you have any thoughts there, or what prompted you to put in that line about how you're kind of happy the new atheists are gone? Interestingly, I have interviewed at least a couple of times the founder of Atheists for Liberty, and he will go on a rampage, on this exact podcast about how the new atheist movement is back. It's just different. It's iterated, but it's back, and so I don't know, there's very active, very live conversation right now about Christianity, which is hilarious because to half the population it is kind of a dead thing that we're just regurgitating, but maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, give me your thoughts.
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but I didn't write that line. Henry Matillo wrote that letter, but
okay. I'll grill him.
He speaks for both of us. We're both signed. He shared it with me. I could have said I don't want that line. I noticed that line. I certainly noticed it. It was the only line in there I think that was in any way controversial or could prompt discussion, and I noticed that line. I think it was one of my last questions to Charles Murray in the interview, and I said, well, and I don't know if you saw this, but on December 9th, Vahakan Muradian, one of our former editors, he's now the arts editor at National Review, wrote an introduction to his 2021 interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali about her book Prey, where, and in the introduction to it, he says, since that interview happened, there was an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. A president won a second non-consecutive term for the first time since Grover Cleveland, and Russia's invaded Ukraine, the biggest war on the European continent since World War II. And he's being glib, but he making a joke, but he says, but the most shocking of all is that Ayaan Hirsi Ali says I'm now a Christian. And I laughed out loud when I read that. And that's what Charles Murray and I were sort of talking about at the end. And I said, because Charles Murray, I'm not when I interviewed him, as I told him, I remember reading his book Coming Apart in sociology class at Yale, and in a way that was sort of a testament to a degree of intellectual diversity or plurality at Yale at the time, because even me as a undergraduate, I first time reading Charles Murray, I obviously knew who he was. I said, wow, it's kind of bold that our professor is putting that forward when, well, most of the kids, they just power at what's around them. They probably didn't know who Charles Murray is because they were born a little later than sort of his heyday. But I thought that was kind of interesting. But as he sort of narrates in the book, he actually sings something pretty interesting. He's saying, it's not that I was atheist or religious or even agnostic. It's just my life was so good and I had so much things to deal with. I just didn't even like think about it or worry about it or like consider it. But if he's saying basically, if I was pressed, I would say I was an agnostic, and that this Christianity stuff is, I won't put words in his mouth, but another fellow I know probably is sort of his viewpoints. He's like, well, this is just science fiction. But anyway, as time goes by, he starts to, and this is, I think, the difference between maybe Charles Murray and some of the other people we're talking about. He is not, and he made that clear in the interview. If you read it, I started to try to talk about like the social utility of Christianity. He says, I don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about the truth value. But to your point on the social utility, so that was pretty interesting. You probably saw the interview. Richard Dawkins a couple of years ago was on someone's podcast, and
Yes, I've written
Richard Dawkins,
who, culturally Christian, he said.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins, like, well, I want to live in a country that's culturally Christian, and I don't want to. And I'm like, wow, that's
which
really
I agree with that too. Like as a atheist-ish, I'm like, I can sign off on that. I get it, totally get it.
So, so I guess, yeah. So Richard Dawkins, Charles Murray, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali all say various things about Christianity. I've actually never interacted with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was interviewed by Merion West, but not by me. And we've never interacted with Richard Dawkins. I'd love to try to get a hold of him. I don't know how many interviews he's doing these days. So I haven't interacted with the two of them myself. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she sort of announced this in Unheard column. And as my memory serves, I think she was mostly talking about the social utility of Christianity, but it's possible now she's more joined Mary.
She said she believed. She said it was so fascinating how she phrased this in an interview with Richard Dawkins. She said, I choose to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is like, okay, that word choose is doing a lot there, because it's not like you believe, it's like you choose to believe. So you don't really believe, but she's choosing to. I found that fascinating. That's a little telling, I think.
But to the point of, on the topic of the wanting to live in a Christian society, I want to live in a Christian society. There are alternatives on offer in the world. I've been to many of them, and I don't like it. I like living in a society that is informed a lot by Christianity. And one of my favorite things about Christianity is this idea of forgiveness, and it's perhaps best exemplified by the good thief on the cross, if you remember, where he has lived this life of so much sin and problem, and he's absolved at the last minute. Now I understand that isn't always socially good, and this is sort of what Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about he says, like, I'm sort of terrified of some of the implications of Christianity, because they ask you to do fairly extreme things, like, forgive someone 7 times 70. That is that realistic? If I've been a victim of crime in Philadelphia. Many of my loved ones, if some of them have been like physically harmed by criminals, what, you're going to forgive them 7 times 70? It asks a lot of people. But I think the message of Christianity, I think it's good for a society. I remember, because I don't like a lot of the alternatives. As I said, I was a started out as a philosophy major, and I remember being in ethics class at Duke University. Later, I remember being in bioethics class at Yale University. I remember Professor Stephen Latham, who was one of the best lecturers I've ever seen. He would come into the classroom, hundreds of people in there, no notes, no PowerPoint, just him and a chalkboard, and he would hold every single person's attention. I would sit on the edge of my seat listening to him. Maybe I was interested in the topic, but I've never met someone who people have all these gimmicks and video clips, and this guy would just talk. And he never said he never said he just spoke. And if the
Wow.
class were 3 times longer, I would have listened. But I remember at one point he talks all about bioethics in this moment of self-reflection, almost as an aside, he says, but the elephant in the room is that most bioethicists are the least ethical people you could possibly meet. And that's kind of what would happen in ethics class. So I'd be at ethics class at Duke University, and Professor David Wong, and I'm not picking on him. He's just, I guess, sharing viewpoints or whatever. That might have been an occasion where, to Bob Jensen's point, I would have actually been somewhat interested in what he believed. You spend your whole life dealing with ethics. Maybe you should tell us, do you think virtue ethics is the way to go? Are you a utilitarian? Like, maybe we should know a little bit. And maybe if you read his books, you do. He just kind of kept it quiet. And he just, typical kind of, it's a little sophomoric, but he's like, according to a lot of these ethical systems, there'd be nothing wrong with having sex with your sister or whatever. And all the classes like, and this is why, I'm interested a little bit in when I interview, it'll be out in a few days. I interviewed Wilfred McClay on his new book, The Jewish Roots of American Liberty, I believe it's called. And he quotes Leon Kass, the bioethicist, who has it's kind of a controversial idea in our enlightenment informed world of the what he calls the wisdom of repugnance. And he says, like, there's something to repugnance. So like a lot of people who have spent a fair amount of time, I think, studying various ethical systems, you start to get into a situation where, although some of the conclusions, like I mentioned, of Christianity, of the forgiveness, can be very troubling, I think they're a lot less troubling than some of the implications of utilitarianism. And some of them are sort of thought experiments, but some of them are real. Like, I'm sure you've heard them, but maybe some people listening haven't. You say, well, if I'm utilitarian, and if we organize society around utilitarian principles, and I show up to the emergency room because I cut my finger and there's 5 people waiting for organ transplants, they can kill me and take my heart and my kidneys and my lungs and things like that, or the utility monster, all the common arguments against utilitarianism. You say, wow, that's sort of troubling. So you say, maybe I'll be a deontologist. Then you start saying, well, I believe in a priori moral principles. And then before you know it, as I think it was Bertrand Russell who said, in philosophy, you start with a simple assertion that almost anyone could believe and reach a conclusion that is baffling or shocking or potentially abhorrent. And then you say, and the next thing you know, you're saying, the famous example, I can't tell a white lie to save the lives of 1 million people. So I don't like, and then some people, and then it's interesting, like some people I knew, especially at Duke, and now a fellow, his name's Marcus Gibson. He's sort of, I think he was always Catholic, but he was very interested in Aristotelian moral philosophy that tries to, kind of following MacIntyre, resolve the seeming irreconcilable frustrations between the deontologists and the utilitarians. And then I think, yeah, I guess like various Catholic theologians over the years, they've tried to sort of fuse Aristotle and Catholicism to try to build a moral system based on that. So,
I mean, if I could, my critique of the cultural Christianity question is that there are shades of gray to it. It's not like, oh, this society is culturally Christian, so they're a good society. They're like all these shades of gray. So, for example, in America, we are culturally Christian, but certain states do way better than other states. And so, like, the most Christian states, the ones that like have the highest church attendance, say, have the highest crime very often, have the highest poverty. There's all these stats, and atheists love to quote them. But like, that doesn't mean that the blue states who are wealthy and like have less crime are not culturally Christian. They're just like another shade of it, right? Just like a lighter blue than like the deep, shade of the religious corners of the country. And like, that's significant. I think that like there needs to be an investigation into how hardcore of a cultural Christian are you, and what are the good parts and what are the bad parts? Because I think that, you know, people just like, that's the end of the conversation. Like cultural Christianity is good. It's like, there's so much nuance and like fascinating topics and subtopics like within there. And we're all trying to like, you know, as a country, as America, we're trying to like learn from each other and what works and what doesn't. That's the idea of like federalism, right? And like, I don't know, I think that red states could swallow a little bit of their pride that's somewhat based in like, we're a good Christian state, right? And be like, maybe we can learn some shit from these like heathens on the coast.
Well, Harry Truman has this famous quotation that when he says, "Whenever I hear someone praying loudly, I go home and lock up my smokehouse." So I think, and I think a lot of people, myself included, are very wary of people who are a little too pray in your face and are sort of suspicious of that. And that's actually reflected in the Gospels when it says something in the effect of, if you go out and pray in the street, you have already had your reward and you should pray in the closet, so to speak. So I think there is an issue with certain people who are kind of presenting themselves as super religious, and that's not backed up by their actions. And I think many of us have seen that in our own lives.
So one last question here. I am very curious, since, you know, you do talk to a lot of people from across the political spectrum as the editor of Merion West. I'm really curious to get your thoughts on partisanship and where you think we are as a country. You know, there's so much talk online about like civil war.
I do interview a lot of people across the political spectrum, and I used to do way more of it. Nowadays, I conduct far fewer interviews than I used to, and they're mostly more with thought type people, like we said, Mary and such. We still interview politicians. In April, I interviewed Senator James Langford about his new book. But we had a little statement of principle at one point. It said, just as the ancients said, consider no man happy until he's dead. And actually, Joseph Epstein talks about that in his book, on his memoir, Never Say You Had a Lucky Life, which I recently read. We said, never consider a politician honest until he's retired, and maybe not even then. So, and I don't mean to be too unfair on politicians. I know a lot, and some of them are really nice people, and they get a bad rap, and some of them are very nice people and do good work. So I'm being a little joking, but interviewing like a lot of rank and file House members, you could just get that on CNN. They stick to their talking points. And it's so like absurd. I remember that with when there was the strike in early 2020 on the Iranian general in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Qasem Soleimani. And because Trump had done it, so many of the House Democrats had to come out and say, like, this is the most horrible strike. This is the most horrible thing. And I won't say who, but one congressman whom I know, he's like, well, I actually thought it was a good idea, but I couldn't, I can't say that. And and everyone knew if a Democratic president had done that, it would, it would probably
would have been
mostly
the opposite
reversed.
result.
Yeah, mostly. I think sometimes Republicans maybe are a little more hawkish, so maybe it wouldn't have been exactly the same, but I would interview, like during Trump's first term, I would interview these House Democrats, and this is kind of an interesting story. So I was interviewing Congresswoman Madeline Dean, Pennsylvania's, I think, 4th district, and she was all hysterical about this like facility that was supposedly housing I guess people who had crossed the border illegally until they were processed or whatever. And I'd interviewed her a couple times, and they would go on these trips to the border, and they would say like, and maybe, I don't know, maybe some people were being treated poorly or whatever. I'm not saying they weren't, I don't know, but it was very like emotionally fraught. So her press secretary asked me to come out and meet them. They were going to do a surprise visit at one of the few immigration detention places not near the border. And I said, sure, I'll come. I'm supposed to be a good journalist. Let's see what's going on. I didn't really feel like I wanted to go, but it was like I had to get up at some ungodly hour in the morning. You know how like the government is. It's like, be there at 7 a.m., like something insane. And I had to drive like 80 minutes to get there. So I had to get up at some ungodly hour, like drive to somewhere I'd never been before. And maybe some people like driving. Well, I just wrote an article about how unsafe it is. So I guess I don't like it anymore. I used to when I was like a kid and first got my license. Like, this is awesome. But so I drive like a long time. So I get there, and they're going to go like ambush these, whoever's in charge of it, whatever federal agency happened to be in charge of that building. I can't remember. There's so many, how the jurisdiction works. I can't remember, but they're going in there and they're hoping or expecting, I'm going to say hoping, but they want to find like people getting treated really poorly. So they don't find that at all. It's like they're like families there and like they have a school running for the kids and the kids are like playing like they have like lessons for them and like they've like the best they can say is like they're not serving them steak dinners. So they come out of the thing and like they came there and it was embarrassing for them because they invited this whole gaggle of press. They had all this press
God.
there. I was one of like 16 people. So I was like, we're gonna see Congresswoman Madeline Dean's character. Is she gonna say like, we're gonna see her character? Is she for real or is she just, and this is where you get jaded, is she just a huge grandstanding person who's lying? She gets out there and she like puts on the crocodile tears and says like, this is so horrible, this is so terrible. And I'll be honest, I usually try to keep a level head, but I was pretty outraged. I was like, this is not right. This is not the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. If you don't agree with the policy, that's fine, but you shouldn't mislead people who didn't get to come out here and see what was going on and make it like it's not. And so I don't interview as many like House members these days for reasons like that, because they generally say the politically expedient thing.
Yeah, that's a really telling story because it does say that like we are so worked up against each other, the left versus the right. And like it is all kind of fundamentally based on lies because everyone is just like playing their little game and they all have like a little mask on with the people who, I mean, we're all the victims of this, right? Like
completely. And that's another reason I almost don't want to, and again, I'm not saying everyone, but that's one of the reasons I don't even really want to participate in this because I'm at Merion West, I know it sounds trite, but we're really trying to get to the truth of things. Wherever we start, like we go with an open mind as much as possible and open to being persuaded, open to getting the right answer. There are probably, to your point in your article, there are probably people who are really wound up about there's too few houses. And I'm not saying they have to change their view, but maybe think about what this Peter Clarke fellow is saying. Maybe there's another way to look at this. But when you get involved with most of these House members, especially, other than, I wrote recently an article about, I was picking on this congressman up in northeastern Pennsylvania called Rob Bresnahan. And I was very touched. Jonathan Church actually chose it as his second favorite article of the year in 2025, which I found very touching. But this is kind of interesting, but only really happens if you almost were there, were paying attention. But I later wrote about it years later. So I interviewed this other congresswoman from Pennsylvania called Susan Wild. She just lost re-election. And when I first interviewed her, she was running for office in 2018. She was part of this, like in Pennsylvania, they call them like the newly elected ladies or something like that. There was a group of ladies who won in 2018. Madeline Dean was one, Mary Gay Sandlin, Chrissy Houlihan, and Susan Wild. There were these four women who were newly elected in the class of 2018 in districts that they all touched each other. So it was like this one. And I interviewed her prior to the election. I was like, she's a neat lady. She was, and again, I'm not saying whether or not I agree with her position. I thought it was neat that she says, I'm not going to accept any corporate PAC money. When you accept corporate PAC money, you become beholden to corporations, especially the pharmaceutical industry. Pennsylvania is suffering from the opioid crisis. I'm not going to accept any corporate PAC money. I was impressed with her. I thought she was really neat. I really liked her. She was probably my favorite. I interviewed a lot of the members of the class of 2018. She was probably one of my favorites. So then I interviewed her again, I think, on the other side of the election. And people, it's like they have a lobotomy when they get to Congress. It's like invasion of the body snatchers. Are you a different person? So I interviewed her in April, I think it was. And I was like, oh, I just want to follow up on this corporate PAC money thing. And she's like, well, I'm still not going to do it. But since I've gotten here, I've realized there's no relationship between getting corporate PAC money and how you vote. It's just kind of a misnomer. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure that it's a convenient position to evolve on, as they say.
Right.
And she's like, well, I'm still not going to do it. And then, as I pointed out in my article the other day, by 2022, she was accepting corporate PAC money, including from the pharmaceutical industry. And I just said in my article, I said, that's why people hate Washington. That's why people hate politics. That's why they do it. It's just like, I don't really believe her. if somebody was going to impartially argue that corporate PAC money, it doesn't influence people as much as people say it is, that's probably fine and true. But I just knew that she was taking that position out of expedience because the DCCC didn't want her to draw attention to the fact that they all took corporate PAC money and create a headache for them. So I'm sure somebody pulled her coat and said, stop talking about that. It makes us look bad or something along those lines. So, but I'll get back to your question. I was just thinking about, because sometimes someone might ask me, Eric, why do you guys not like try to interview House members like you used to? And I would say it's just, we don't want to be a megaphone for people trying to score political points. Like,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
The James Langford interview was a little different because he wrote a book and it was somewhat thoughtful. And I read the whole book and we talked about the book. And I thought people would be interested, to your point, in partisanship with James Langford, because if you remember, he was the Republican senator who tried to make the border deal, and he did like a lot of very messy sausage making in Washington. And he told me he wasn't even going to talk about that in the book. But then his wife said, James, you can't, that's what you're known for now. Nobody's going to want it. People are going to be disappointed if they pay $26 for your book and then they don't talk about outside of Oklahoma what people know you for. So he's sort of reluctantly wrote the chapter. And as I recall, I think it was the longest in the book. And that's another thing. People are just kind of like primed, or it's like Pavlov's dog. And I told him, I said, Senator Langford, you are the only Republican senator I think I could interview who all my right of center friends are say cuss words when they hear your name, and all my left of center friends say, James Langford, what a reasonable guy. So we got to chuckle about that. But yeah, so it's interesting to ask that question because I am in sort of a little spate right now of reading books by U.S. senators who are trying to maybe be more independent, maybe try to solve a little more problems. But I've never met most of these people whose books I'm reading, so it's hard to know. Kind of with politicians, you're always saying what's spin and what's real. So
right.
I'd love to. I would love to track down Joe Manchin and maybe talk to him. So on my to-do list. Yeah, it's on my to-do list. I'd love to just kind of talk to him. He lives in a state that touches Pennsylvania. He lives in a neighboring state, and I'd just be really interested in talking to him. So I'd love to try to track him down, but I have just been reading books about the so-called problem solvers.
Well, I've got to run in about a minute or two.
Yeah.
But really quickly, I was going to ask about what you're up to writing right now, what you're reading right now, and also if I can ask, like, where can people follow you and find your writing?
Oh, thanks so much. Well, I am at work on a big article on capital punishment. It's an idea that I have gone back and forth on. When I first started my writing career at 18 years old, I published an article that was I was very influenced, as we were talking about, by the deontologists at the time, very hard line against capital punishment. We've got to abolish it. But then as the years went on, I started to hear more about some of the crimes that happened and interact with more people who have done such crimes. I've interviewed a couple of guys for this piece who have been convicted of murder. And I started to slowly but surely, I think, reach Barack Obama's at least 2008 stated position on capital punishment, that it should be used sparingly, but should be retained on the books for crimes that are just truly beyond the pale. And I don't want to try to, as I was saying, try to really go and see with my own eyes what's going on. So I'm hoping, I don't know if hoping is the right word, but before I do that, I would maybe like to, if possible, be at an execution to see exactly what it looks like before I say, maybe we should do this once in a while. Maybe I'll see it and say, oh my goodness, we can't do this. This is not how a civilized society should operate. But
I'll look forward to reading that. That sounds
that's one of the articles.
I've got evolving views on that topic too, but
it's a tough one, and
it is. My hot take is that, like, I think morally it's okay for a state in certain, like, rare circumstances, but practically speaking, it's so expensive and it just drags on in court for so long that I'm practically against it.
That's a great argument.
That's my
one
nuanced
of the good
take.
arguments. So,
but any books you would recommend?
Well, I just read a fantastic book. It's called The President's Club. It came out in 2012. It's by a pair of, I believe, Time magazine reporters, and it's about the relationships between U.S. presidents and their
Oh,
various,
interesting.
their various friendships, animosities, relationships, and people give me books as gifts, which is very nice, and it's a gift I welcome. But I'm often have so many in front of it, so I probably got this book maybe 2 years ago, and it's a little longer. It's almost 600 pages, and I just like couldn't put it down. I read it in a few days,
Oh,
and
interesting. Okay.
yeah, I couldn't put it
What's it
down.
called?
It's called The President's Club.
Okay. I'll also check that out. That sounds
And
interesting.
I just reviewed History Matters by David McCullough. It was compiled by his research assistant and
Okay.
daughter, sort of some posthumously, some of which were previously unpublished essays and speeches. So I thought that
Cool.
was really excellent. So I know you've got to run, Peter, but this has been
I
a
know. I
lot of
wish I could
fun.
chat more. I do have to run back, but this has been a lot of fun. Eric's great touching
Thank you
base.
so much.
Come
It's
back literally anytime. And yeah, I've been busy with other things, but I'd love to shoot you guys some articles sometime
please do.
2026, and we'll see if I
I
can make that
really
happen.
appreciate your interest in Merion West. That's very kind.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put links in the show notes down to that publication and some other of your relevant works. And thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.